The objective of this video is to illustrate how one can monitor a single or multiple inspector vision sensors in a plant environment from the viewer, the new HMI for the inspector vision sensors. On the screen, you currently see 3 inspector sensors that are all connected with the viewer on the same network via a switch. The first inspector is i20 DOM version and is used on a can to inspect presence or absence of lot code using Edge Pixel Counter tool. The second inspector is i40 and is used to inspect if the right label name has been applied to the CD. The third inspector is P30 and has currently 2 applications within, one for part alignment of a SICK poker chip using SICK logo on the chip, and the second one to detect number of characters and their positions from SICK logo on the chip using Blob Finder tool. And this, of course, is the viewer that this video is all about. Note that all inspectors are already configured and programmed. They are ready for their respective applications prior to using the viewer. The viewer cannot be used to replace SOPAs and teach or configure the parameters of the sensors for application. It is used for monitoring the inspectors. So, looking at the screen right now, we can divide the screen into 2 halves. The top half of the screen has menu buttons that are specific to the inspector unit after one has established connection with it. Looking at the digital outputs or results from the sensor, getting some statistical information or chart, selecting a different recipe or reference object, and so forth. One can see that no inspector has been connected to the viewer yet, and that is why the buttons on the top half are grayed out. The bottom half has buttons that are specific to the entire systems, and we will go through all these buttons one at a time during the course of this video. So let us first start by establishing connection with an individual inspector unit. So we will click on Select Inspector, and what we see is we have a list of inspectors, much more than the 3 that we are physically connected to. The ones in red here, they are showing to be offline, meaning that they were connected to the viewer at one point in time and are no longer online. The 3 that we are connected to right now are online but are unreachable, and that is due to the fact that they all have different IP address and network settings. We can get rid of the ones that are offline if we know that we are no longer going to be needing them or connecting to them again by simply clicking on individual unit and then clicking on delete, and that should get rid of any data that's inside the viewer pertaining to that particular unit. For now, we will go back to the menu screen to the network settings so that we can configure these inspectors with IP addresses that allow us to be able to connect to them, and we have an option of changing IP address for each individual inspector unit, or by checking on this DHCP, which allows them to get an IP address automatically from the server that's on the network, or we can let the viewer assign IP addresses automatically to all the devices that are on the network. We can simply check each of these 3 units. This process takes about 30 seconds to 60 seconds, give and take. Once this is complete, we can go ahead and see that now the status of each individual inspectors has changed from being not just online, but they are also reachable. We can therefore establish connection with any of them, and we will start with the first one and connect to it. As soon as we establish connection to it, we immediately get into the live view of the device itself, and if I move my can underneath over here, you can see that the green rectangle shows that this particular inspection is passed, and in an instance when the code is not detected or not sufficient enough, then we have a red rectangle showing us fail. We can go back to the menu screen and we can look at the results, and this shows us the digital outputs of the sensors. So currently the inspection is a pass, so that's the digital output that's out. If I try to make my inspection fail, that output changes. We can go back to the menu screen and look at another menu button, which is for inspection chart. The inspection chart shows us what inspections are available for this particular job that we are in right now. There is only one inspection, which is called dot code check, and what it actually is it's a pixel counter counting how many darker pixels are there on the can. And currently the inspection is passed, so you can see that my thresholds are configured between 5 and 50%, meaning that if I see anything between 5% or 50% of the darker pixels for the given region of interest that I have configured, that inspection is supposed to be a pass. And if I try to fail my part right now, my curve jumps down lower than my minimum threshold configured, or if I have too much darker pixels, then my curve jumps much higher than my maximum given thresholds. This is a very useful tool because what the customer can typically do is they can have 100 good samples, 100 bad samples, and pass them underneath the camera and see what kind of thresholds are coming out for each of the inspections, and based on those results of the thresholds, we can then go ahead and tweak or configure our application to work more robustly in our own advantage. If we had more inspections available for this particular job, we should have been able to look at the charts for those inspections as well. We can go back to the menu tab, and we will go through each of the menu buttons, but let us use another inspector device now to do that. So we will disconnect with the device i20 DOM for now, and we will go ahead and establish connection with the inspector i40, and we should expect to go back again in the live view as soon as this connection is established. We immediately get to the live view of the inspector i40, and what's happening right now is we have an object locator locating the SICK logo at the bottom, and then with reference to that we are looking at the pattern on the top label to verify if it's the right label. So right now we have a disk 2 that's running for the label that's called develop, so we are trying to look for this pattern for the development, and that's a pass inspection, which is why we see a green over here. As soon as I put in a different CD over here, once I put in a different CD over here, that particular inspection is failed. So if we have a different batch coming in, we can go ahead and try to switch jobs over here, and we can do that by going through the select reference object tab, and in order to be able to change recipes, we need to switch mode and go to the edit mode. We can see at the bottom that we have 2 recipes available for 2 different labels. I will select the label that's appropriate for the current sample we have and select that, and now we can go ahead again back to the menu to the live view, and now that particular inspection changes to pass because we have the right sort of job that's running in the system. Inspector i40 allows you to store up to 32 recipes in its own flash, but with the viewer now you have a capability to store unlimited number of recipes, and as we go along in this video I will show you how you can actually achieve that functionality. We will go back to the menu mode and now go through the history view. The history view shows you all the images that are logged by the viewer. In the case of the inspector i40, there is a functionality within this particular device to send images over the FTP server. And if I click on that, had my FTP server functionality been configured, I would have seen logged images for that over here. The log tab, on the other hand, shows you or downloads the last 30 images that the inspector has logged in its own flash onto the viewer, and you can go through them. The live view obviously just shows you the live images, and should you be interested in any of these logs for whatever purposes, you are able to export them to a USB flash drive and then be able to work on them. Going back to the menu tab, the statistics tab over here, that shows you the statistical data for whatever number of jobs or reference objects you have running. So currently I have 2 jobs. One of my jobs was never running, but the other one has been running for a while, so I do have data as far as how many images were acquired, what was the frame rate, what kind of inspection was going on, and so forth. So it gives you more control over your inspection. We can go back to the menu tab and select another inspector. So we will disconnect from the current inspector, and now we will establish connection with the inspector P30. The live view of the inspector P30 looks slightly different. This is because there is an additional functionality available in the P30 whereby you can use 4 digital outputs to align your part. So what you see these arrows represent is, as soon as this center of this part is outside the green box, the outputs will tell me where I need to move my inspector sensor in order for me to be aligned properly, and the same functionality is available to be viewed by the operator as well. Other than the visualization as far as how close your part is towards the center, you also get the X, Y position of the part as well as the angular rotation from where it was taught in. There is also one additional functionality that's available in the Inspector P30, and I would like to show that to you by selecting a difference recipe. So the other recipe I have is for randomly locating the part, and what this does is simply locates the 4 characters SICK on top of this poker chip based on the intensity and the size. If we go to the live view now, what we see is it just gives us a path and it tells us the XY coordinates for the first found part. But if you go to the results tab now, instead of digital outputs, what you see is for each of those characters or positions found, you're getting the X, Y area and the angle for each of them. This is what you would be able to communicate via Ethernet to a PLC in your real application. So much for the top half of the screen. We already covered a number of the bottom half, such as the network settings, selecting an inspector, but covering the portion whereby you can have unlimited number of recipes or be able to clone other devices. So let's say if you have one device that just died and you have to replace it, you can actually store the configuration for that device on the viewer, and then if the device dies and you have to replace it, you can clone this new device to act the same way as the old device. Or you can even clone other devices which have similar applications running underneath there. And the way to do that is you would just select the inspector that you are connected to, and you would export the configuration from the flash of the inspector device to the viewer itself, and you can call it anything you want. For the purposes of this exercise, I will call it test. And now that configuration has been saved. I am now able to select this configuration and import it to any other device that is the same on my network. So I can import from the viewer configuration for the inspector I40 to another I40. I cannot import configuration between devices which are not the same. Going back to the menu to see other menu buttons, we also have user management, which allows us to create different user accounts for various personnel and assign rights or privileges as far as what they are allowed to do on this machine, whether they can change jobs only, or are they able to delete or export data, and so forth. The systems tab, that's for the admin to show them who logged into the viewer at what time and what kind of operations they did, whether they deleted a particular device, or they cloned a particular device, or they changed recipes, and so forth. Hopefully this gives you enough illustration as far as the functionality and capabilities of the new viewer HMI. If you have any further questions, feel free to get back to us at the contact information that appears on the next slide. Thank you for your time and attention.